All right, here we are. This is part two, right? Part B of the chapter 12 video lecture on sustaining and protecting aquatic biodiversity, right? We finished last time talking about shark finning and the importance of sharks as a top predator. But we also then see the opposite side of humanity, where you have people that can be passionate about saving species too. We all have these capacities within us, right? And we can see very often, like the person that was protecting sharks or trying to be, to educate people, she had experiences with shark, positive experiences with shark at a young age, and that's what sort of spurred this love of them. And so again, we see this again and again as we come in contact with, see these fantastic species that we share this planet with, then we're just so much more likely to want to care and protect them and be motivated to figure out ways that, again, we can survive here on this planet as humanity, but also do so in a way that is sustainable and provides for these other species. Not only do we need them, but morally and ethically, you could argue that's what we need. We're just so good at fishing is part of the problem with trying to protect our aquatic ecosystems. You can see all the different things we have, so many types of nets and lines that and ships that can stay out with refrigeration for long periods of time, and fish finding, sonar. It's just, there's so much, right? And and often this goes back to tragedy of the commons. The more I take, the more I make. And as everyone, as all the fishermen will say, take this mindset, because remember, you don't get paid to fish, right? You get paid from what you bring back and what you can sell. And so, of course, the workers do, but you know what I mean, as far as an industry. And so it's important that, that we keep this in mind. Okay, so moving on. Why is it difficult to protect aquatic biodiversity? Well, rapid increase in human impacts, the invisibility of the problem. What do we mean? We look out at a body of water and like, wow, that's beautiful. And we don't often understand or see what's going on underneath, inside the water, in the water, what's going on, right? It's more difficult for humans because we breathe air and we live on land, right? We need to bring our air with us if we're going scuba diving, things like that. And if you go down far, it's dark. And so you can bring a light, but only what you're seeing is what you're shining the light on is what you can see, but you can be missing a lot of other things. Next one, citizen unawareness. So a former student of mine who now lives in Australia, this reminds me of it. I still keep in contact with her, and she was sharing some things on Facebook that essentially, once the citizens in Australia found out that there were other countries' ships in their waters and they were going after their sharks, actually, they all became outraged, right? They were all protesting, say, save our sharks, we want you out of here. In other words, but not until they knew about it did they do something. And again, I'm a firm believer that people do the best they can with the information that they have. As we know better, we do better. And so by, I think, shining light on what's going on, as people become educated and aware of what's going on, then we have more of a chance to protect biodiversity in this planet, right? In the species on this planet. And that's also why it's dangerous when we allow ourselves to become disconnected, right? To not go outside very much, to not see the beauty of this planet, because then we don't know about it, or you feel disconnected, then it's not as much of a priority, Okay, lack of legal jurisdiction, things like that. Remember our human ecological footprint, right? The amount of land and space it takes to provide for us, generally speaking, is expanding. It doesn't have to be. We can take individual actions to try to lessen that as well. And again, of course, much of the damage is not visible to most people. Again, kind of out of sight, out of mind. And many people for too long have thought of the ocean as just an inexhaustible resource, and that, hey, there's no possible way we could, impact it. And we just see that's just not true. Dilution is not always the solution to pollution, thinking we can just dump certain toxins into the water. Or one last example, there was a story someone was saying, I was listening to it on a podcast, and it was his experience in a fish market, and this was in Japan. And he said, imagine you walk in and it's just this huge building, and as far as you can see, it's just fish and just the incredible amount of fish. And what he said stuck with me. And he said, based on all the fish he saw, he said, surely the ocean must be empty, right? And it just struck him like just the amount of fish that was there was just, it just blew his mind, right? And then as it got toward the end of the day, and all the fish had been bought up, he quickly realized, like, wait, this is one day in just one of these places, right? This goes on every day throughout the world, and it was amazing to him how much we were taking out. Okay. So again, what can we do? Well, laws. Remember, laws can be applied to a country, so that applies to the people who live there, but we can't make the laws, or other countries can't for each other. And that's where international treaties or agreements come in. Countries willing to work together, for a common goal. And education can help reduce the premature extinction of marine species, and frankly, all species, For example, since 1989, the US government has required offshore shrimp trawlers to use turtle exclusion devices. As you're trawling on the bottom, you can get whatever it is, including turtles. And they said, hey, we need the turtles. We need these nests to have a way that turtles can get out. It's not perfect, right? The turtles need to know how to happen to be in the right place to be able to get out so they don't die. It's better than nothing. But again, as it was sort of brought to your attention what was happening, then things were put in place to try to make a difference. And also to consider too, sea turtle tourism brings in almost 3 times as much money as the sale of turtle products. So again, as we can flip that paradigm, so we realize that there is more wealth and value, not only for the species, but also for humanity, right? When we realize that it's better to have them with us than being bought and sold on the black market. Okay. And again, sea turtle tourism as one example. When a tourist sees that sees the sea turtle, they have a great experience, right? Oh my gosh, there it is, right? Maybe they're taking pictures of it, they're telling people about it, maybe sharing it on Facebook, social media, which brings more people down. And so that is worth so much more alive with, repeat customers sort of thing. 6 of the world's 7 major turtle species are threatened or endangered because of human activities. Let me share this video with you, showing people working together to try to make a difference. So I love it, just a story like this. Number one, look at all the people that have come out to kind of be a part of this experience of releasing it back, as humans, we have such an ability to care and to try to make a difference, or to kill and destroy, it's of course everywhere in between, but we have to remember that the choice is up to each one of us of how we decide to live our lives. I'm a big proponent of be the captain of your ship, right? This is your life. Make the decisions for yourself. What kind of life do you want to live, and maybe you want to get involved with something like this. Maybe you don't. Maybe you have something else that you're passionate about. We all have unique talents or whatever, but you have the capability too. None of these people, and I want to say it this way, none of these people are special to the point of, everyone's special. My point is they're not different from you. There's a danger that comes in when we see people doing cool things, maybe thinking, well, I could never do that, and we have to remember these are all ordinary people who are and they're probably all busy too, right? And each one of these people have certain things going on in their lives, but they've decided to make it either a priority or to spend some time, to be out, at the very least, be a part of this or whatever. So again, some people made the decisions to trap the turtles and sell them on the market and all that kind of stuff for money. Some people decided to spend their time, trying to heal them and release them. And, it's just, I think it's always interesting, look into humanity. So, but it's a reminder to you, we all have we can all do what we can do and decide, right? Give it some thought. How do we want to live our lives? Okay. Especially again, when you think of, that the 6 of the world's 7 major turtle species are threatened or endangered because of human activities, a species that has been around longer than the dinosaurs, maybe you could argue, what, they've earned their place on this planet. And if it's our actions as one species that are causing them to go extinct or become threatened, number one, maybe we shouldn't do that, but maybe also we should send up the red flag. Wait a minute. Here's a species that has been very successful for millions of years, and now in a relatively short period of time, they're going extinct. Again, some would say this should be a wake-up call for us. It's like, what conditions are we creating on this planet if successful species cannot make it anymore? And what could that potentially mean for us and your children and grandchildren and so forth? Okay. Again, tying to the problem with plastics getting out into the water. And also we have to remember that the norm of sea life essentially is, if it can fit in its mouth, it's food. Humans have created this stuff called plastics, right? That you should not be eating. And of course, animals don't know this, right? Turtles don't know this. They see something, hey, like jellyfish, can you see, one of these contains a plastic bag. One of them contains a delicious jellyfish for a turtle, not for us, right? It'd be easy to go for the plastic bag thinking it's a jellyfish, And so again, they can ingest it. It can disrupt their digestive systems, block it, cause problems. Plastics also have a way of absorbing toxins, and then it can release those once inside of whatever eats it too. All right, next case study, the endangered Florida manatee, also known as the sea cow, right? Manatees eat water hyacinths that can grow at the surface, which then can block out sunlight for photosynthesis. So they eat that and then kind of keep that open, right? They are endangered due to habitat loss, entanglement from fishing lines and nets, being hit by speedboats, right? The propellers, right, as they're floating at the top, stress from cold, and also they have a very naturally low reproductive rate that makes them more vulnerable. All right, so let me share this quick. In case you've never seen a manatee, let me share this video with you. So many cool species on this planet. And so I would highly recommend, we all have things to do in our lives, but make the time to get out and experience what this planet has. We are lucky to live on this planet that has so many amazing species. We share this planet with other species that have been here longer than us, have evolved to just be able to do incredible things. So here we go. Here's the Florida manatee.
On a lovely December morning, I set out with Captain Stacy Dunn on her 3-hour manatee tour in Kings Bay, Florida. My hope is that we'll have a chance to swim near at least one of the area's enormous aquatic mammals.
Just also to point out, as you think about careers or jobs, notice a manatee tour. Someone who's an entrepreneur, right? Guess what? They have developed a tour that they take people out. Not only could you make money, but you're also maybe educating people and inspiring them to want to do more as well, right? So again, so many opportunities if you take a moment to think about it.
And the chances of this happening are excellent. Though some endangered Florida manatees are present in Kings Bay as spring-fed waters year-round, between roughly mid-November and late March each year, their numbers swell to around 500. The species, a subspecies of the West Indian manatee, come to escape the Gulf of Mexico's chilly waters, and their presence is all about survival.
They can get hypothermia and cold stress if they're in cold water, so they have to come here and stay in the warm springs, which are 72 degrees. That's what Mother Earth keeps them.
We get our first glimpse of these gigantic creatures on the outskirts of one of the 7 manatee sanctuaries that provide critical habitat within the Kings Bay Manatee Refuge. During peak season, people aren't allowed within these sanctuaries. We are, however, allowed to swim in Three Sisters Springs, a complex of 3 spring areas and the most popular place for manatee encounters. Here, the manatees are visible as soon as we enter the water, initially trailing our movements and then continuing swiftly beneath us towards the springs. As I make my way through the passage leading to the springs, a mother and calf also swim past. At birth, calves weigh about 30 kilos. Heavy, yes, but not so much for creatures that average over 540 kilos and can weigh over 1,500 kilos.
The ones in the wild that have to fend for themselves, their top weight when we do health assessments, which Mike and I are very involved in, the most we've had is around 2,200 pounds.
As we reach the springs, the waters become magnificently clear, revealing several resting individuals who rise occasionally to breathe. Although manatees can hold their breath for up to 20 minutes, they usually surface every 3 to 5 minutes. Heeding Stacy's directions, we remain on the water's surface, calmly observing these beauties. Federal and state laws protect this species, and disturbing or touching a resting manatee is prohibited throughout the refuge. Quite a few other activities are also off limits, including chasing, riding, pinching, poking, cornering, and surrounding them. While most of the 15 or so manatees present in this section of the springs are either resting or otherwise disinterested in our presence, a few are quite friendly. We're not supposed to initiate contact, but some extroverts have no qualms about checking us out fully. Their antics allow me to get a good look at their flippers, which each have 3 to 4 fingernails, as well as their muscular lips, which are capable of manipulating food. These cheeky vegetarians seem to smile at times, but their grins aren't toothy.
They have teeth, but they're called rotating molars, and they sit way back in their jawbone, so you'll never be able to see them.
Eventually, one manatee nuzzles me. An amazing experience at first. When it pulls my hair, though, I'm reminded that these gentle but wild animals are potentially powerful, and while the no-contact recommendation is intended to protect the manatees, it probably benefits their human visitors as well. Whether resting or active, these adorable, funny mermaids are indeed mesmerizing, and I leave the water on a natural high. And though some might classify this as a once-in-a-lifetime sort of experience, given the tour's reasonable price, I'm seriously tempted to come along again tomorrow.
All right. So again, there's another amazing species we share this planet with, and what a shame it would be if it were to go extinct because of things that we're doing. All right. All right. So commercial whaling. After many of the world's whale species were overharvested, commercial whaling was banned in 1960, but the ban may be overturned. Okay, so despite the ban, Japan, Norway, and Iceland kill about 1,300 whales of certain species for scientific purposes, although meat is still sold commercially. So here's the thing. Now, first, as we try to see this, all sides of this, right? It might seem foreign or different to us, right, to eat whale. It's not something that most of us have been brought up. It's not something most of us would want to buy. However, in some places, that is something that's part of a culture, a cultural thing, and has been part of their diet, and it's something that some people do want, right? And so some people might argue, like, wait a minute, don't you guys harvest other things? Do you take shrimp and crab and fish from the ocean and eat it? Wait a minute, we like to do the same with whale, so why should we not be allowed to do that, right? Now, many of the species are endangered and threatened. These are incredible species, and so some could argue, well, that's also the reason why that maybe they shouldn't be doing this, right? Okay. But so how do you get around this? Well, the ban on commercial whaling says you may not, harvest them except if you want to do some sort of like scientific research, meaning if you kill the whale and then you want to study, what have they been eating? Let's do, so you can take a look inside the stomach, do the gut analysis, and figure out what they've been eating. Some are accusing them, saying, listen, you're really not doing the science. You're just, you're using that loophole, right? You kill it, say, hey, we looked at what's in the stomach. All right, hey, guess what? Now we have the rest of this blubber and stuff that we can sell. So some are saying they're using the loophole, to try to really harvest the whales and saying it's for science when it's not really. So, but anyway, so that's what is going on with that. All right, protecting and sustaining marine biodiversity. Fully protected marine reserves make up less than 0.3% of the world's ocean area. Now, again, you can imagine the ocean covers more than 70%, about 71% of this planet. So there's a lot of, that's a lot of ocean, as you can imagine, right? Now, studies show that fish populations double, size grows of fish by a third, reproduction triples, and species diversity increase by almost 25% when you protect these areas. So the lesson is if we recognize that we are causing damage to an area or to a species, often if we stop doing it in time, they can rebound, okay? And so, when we protect an area, we do see that the fish, they do start to come back as long as we do it fast enough. That being said, you can also imagine how a fisher person will say, right, who that's their livelihood. If they're now told that they can't fish a certain area, you can probably also understand how they might feel about that. Say, well, what am I supposed to do now? You're saying I can't fish in these areas anymore. And on the one hand, we can see, well, that's tough. I mean, no one wants to be told that they can't do their work and provide for their family. The other side, though, can say too, the continuance of this species and for future generations maybe is bigger than your job. So that to ensure that we do have more fish in the future that can be harvested, we need to maybe stop fishing in these areas for a certain amount of time. Okay, again, just trying to back up to see all of this, right? Some communities work together to develop what are called integrated plans, right? Integrated coastal management plans. And what that is, basically, it's trying to get everyone on board in making the policy, right? Let's bring everyone to the table. Why? Because what we find out, what's the most important thing really is compliance. Meaning if there's a problem, we want people to stop doing whatever it is that's causing the problem. If you just tell someone one thing, like stop doing this, well, they might listen, they might not. It generally works better, as you can imagine, if they're involved in the process, right? If they feel involved and they're in there and they have a voice, then they're most likely to comply with it, and that's ultimately what we want, what is needed. So revamping ocean policy, some call for an overhaul of the U.S. ocean policy and management, develop more of a unified national policy, increase the federal budget for ocean research, centralize the National Oceans Agency, and so forth, right? Increase public awareness, education, that people know what's going on, and of course, setting up marine reserves as well. So here are a bunch of potential solutions. And again, you could pause here if you want, kind of look it through and see some of the potential solutions that we could do. All right, so wetlands are one of those things, right, that we protect. Now, we have lots of wetlands in Michigan, and guess what? If you buy a piece of property and there are wetlands on there, it is on you as the buyer to know what you are buying. And if you buy a piece of property, it is in your best interest to do what's called your due diligence, right? Meaning know what you're buying, have a survey done, whatever. So you know what your boundaries are and if you have wetlands, because here's the deal. If you have wetlands on your property, you are not allowed to fill them in because the overall agreement is we need our wetlands, right? Guess what? That's where the water goes when it rains. If you could imagine when it rains, I've mentioned this already. Let's say we got 2 inches of rain last night or something. You think, okay, whatever. Imagine I gave you a hose and I said, fill up Southeast Michigan with 2 inches of water. You quickly realize, wow, when it rains, we can get an incredible, so trillions of gallons of water falling at one time. And that water will hit, and if it's not absorbed, it will run someplace. And naturally, those wetland areas are the places where the water will naturally go. So that's one thing. If you were to fill that in, the water's going to maybe go on your neighbor's property. That wasn't a wetland area. So you created that property after you bought it. It allows for a habitat for species. It helps with the recharge of groundwater. So anyway, bottom line, they're important. Now, if you wanted to fill in some, a wetland, well, you can apply to do that. All right. But you have to, generally speaking, in order for that to be approved, you need to kind of explain and prove that this is a worthy reason, for whatever reason, you can say this needs to be done. And if it is, they often will make you, reclaim and or restore or create a wetland of equal size and value at another place. Okay. All right. So again, here's some other solutions for protecting wetlands. And you can take a minute and look through that. And and by the way, I should have said, that's what mitigation banking is. Okay, back here, right? Mitigation banking, say, okay, if you're going to fill in wetlands, you need to have created or restored an equal area of wetland someplace else. That's mitigation banking. As it says here, use that as a last resort, meaning, can you ever truly make another area of equal value, someplace else? It's going to be different for sure, and so let's do that maybe as a last resort, because there are some other solutions. But at the same time, communities want to have some level of flexibility, meaning maybe that wetlands happens to be in the perfect place for whatever, for a hospital that is really needed by a community, or something else maybe would bring in lots of jobs that is desperately needed by the community, so they might say, okay, well, maybe we will then fill this in as long as we can create another one someplace else, something like that. Okay. And again, you can pause it here if you want and read through those. All right, restoring the Florida Everglades. The world's largest ecological restoration project involves trying to, guess what? Undo some of the damage inflicted on the Everglades by us, what we did. So first, let me kind of show you the Florida Everglades. Okay, so let's zoom in here. Now, the Florida Everglades are in this area down here. And this lake right here has one of the greatest names of a lake ever. And this is Lake Okeechobee. Lake Okeechobee. We have the Kissimmee River up here. Now, if you've ever been to Florida, even though they call it the Sunshine State, it is very common for it to get frequent rains. It might rain and sometimes when it rains, man, it can pour. Okay, anyway, so rain falls down, but very often, it might not be a whole day thing. It might be a little bit, a short period of time during the day, and then the sun comes out after that anyway. So historically, this is what happened, right? The rain falls and then flows into, in this case, the Kissimmee River. And then you can see it here kind of meandering back and forth. It goes into Lake Okeechobee. And then from Lake Okeechobee, like a thin sheet of water, essentially, Lake Okeechobee would flow down through what we call the Florida Everglades, and it flows out down this way. Okay, that's the way historically it's always been. Now, what has happened? Well, people have discovered Florida, right? Oh my gosh, in the wintertime, it's really nice down here. And so a lot of people have been moving to Florida. Now, during the rains, sometimes it could flood. And they said, I know, well, how can we stop this? Well, imagine if you've got a river that flows like this, guess what? Every time it turns, it slows the water down and it stores its ability to drain. And so the idea was, I know, why don't we have a straight shot, right? So the water can flow more directly and drain more quickly into Lake Okeechobee. All right, and they did it. Let me show you. Look at this. See the straight shot? That is not natural. Humans created this, right? Okay. And the idea, hey, a nice straight shot, and that way the water can flow more quickly and it can drain, so we're not going to get the flooding, right? Okay. And again, it'll go down to Lake Okeechobee. So we'll come back to that in a second. here into Lake Okeechobee, and then from Lake Okeechobee. Now, it worked. It definitely, helped stop some of the flooding up here. But here's the problem then too. As more people move to Florida, more people wanted drinking water, and you're Lake Okeechobee as a water source, but also look at all this area down here. If you were to take a guess, what is all this? And if you're thinking it's agricultural land, you would be absolutely right. And guess what a major source of water is? If you're thinking Lake Okeechobee, you'd be right. Can you imagine if a lot of this water is being diverted to people for drinking water and for agriculture, you've significantly reduced the flow of water then going through the Florida Everglades, which has been a big problem, right? So what they're trying to do now is to kind of put it back the way it was, which is very expensive, which I'll talk about in a second. Now, as you can imagine, as there's less water flowing down through the Everglades, now that was the norm for so many species that were adapted to that. And when the water was significantly cut and large areas had dried up, we lost a lot of species, which I'll talk more about in a second. So they're trying to put it back the way that it was. And let me show you sort of, that's one of the great things about this is we can actually see where they're doing this. So look at this canal. Do you see how it used to go? I mean, you can see where it used to be, like right here in the picture, right? All right, and we can say, oh, well, okay, look what they did. They kind of restored those twists and turns of it, okay? So they're, again, trying to undo. Again, here you can see where this canal used to be, right? You can see the whole thing, Okay, and so that is the restoration process. And we can see it picks back up over here, back into this canal, okay? So that's sort of what's going on with the Florida Everglades and Lake Okeechobee. So let's now go back to this. And it also shows you sometimes, smart people can make decisions that turn out to not be wise, So again, here we are trying to now undo this. So let me do this real quick. One second, sorry. All right, so I think with that explanation, now some of this will make more sense, right? So as you're trying to undo some of the damage inflicted by us, now because of what had happened, up to 90% of the park's wading birds have vanished. Other vertebrate populations are down up to 95%. Again, large volumes of water that once flowed through the park have been diverted to crops and cities. And the runoff, right, from all that agriculture and people using fertilizers and so forth have caused algal blooms. And that is a big problem. Okay. So much so, if you remember, tying back to water way back, water at the beginning of the year, we were saying that Florida has been experiencing so often what's called red tide. It is a very toxic protist that produces a toxin into the water that kills marine species, fish. You can't swim in the water when you go down there. If it's really bad, even it goes into the air, your eyes burn, you cough. It's horrible, right? It's bad for tourism and everything else. And that has been happening over here. And what we're finding out is that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers kind of does like a flushing almost of Lake Okeechobee, and a lot of those fertilizers are released out this way and it flows over here. So anyway, so part of the plan is to try to help stop this, right? So again, the project has been attempting to restore the Everglades and Florida's water supply. And again, you can read the case study in your book too, or hopefully you have. Okay. And it's the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan that is the very expensive process of trying to put it back the way it was. So again, as I mentioned earlier, what is mitigation banking? Now, this term applies specifically for wetlands. Again, going back to this idea, it will actually allow the destruction, the filling in of an existing wetland, as long as an equal area of the same type and so forth is created or restored someplace else. as you can imagine, as I've already talked about, we really want to do this as, as sort of the last thing. This is not the first choice, but sometimes for communities, they've decided that it's in their best interest that they go ahead with this. But at the very least, then we say, okay, well then, make or restore a wetland someplace else. Okay, lakes are difficult to manage and are vulnerable to planned and unplanned introductions of non-native species, right? Especially lakes that don't have a large flushing action, are more vulnerable. And right, for decades, invasion by non-native species have caused major ecological and economic damage to North America's Great Lakes. We know this, living where we are, how important the Great Lakes are to us and the fishing industry. And just to sort of tie it back to the Asian carp as one example of an invasive species, we need to keep this species out. If it gets into the Great Lakes, it will change things in the Great Lakes. It will diminish it, and we will long for the time, like we are right now, living with the Great Lakes not having the Asian carp in there. Remember that prevention is the key. Okay, so not only the Asian carp, but other invasive species as well. All right, so that's it for the chapter 12 video lecture. Thank you.